How's it going, people? Welcome to United View and welcome to the Tactical View. Manchester United under Erik ten Hag have become the first top six side of the season to beat Aston Villa in a fantastic pulsating 3-2 comeback victory that had pretty much everything any Manchester United fan could ever want to see. It had the terrible start that we've all come to know and love by this point, had a fantastic comeback, and to be honest, from a tactical point of view, Erik ten Hag got a hell of a lot of things right. So all of you out there that Erik ten Hag out, you're complaining about the manager, complaining about this, complaining about that, maybe just now it's time to give him a bit of credit for all the things that he did actually get right against Aston Villa, a team that, as we've said, have beaten pretty much every other top six team they've played so far. The only one they haven't beaten is Liverpool, and they haven't played them. So, look, it was a fantastic result from Ten Hag against a high-flying team and a manager in Unai Emery that has set his team up this season to cause problems to pretty much any opposition. Now, I know some of you will come at me for, but Villa played a high line, that suits our players, suits the way we want to play, suits us being direct. Why hasn't it worked against any of the other big teams this season then? The reality is you've got to give Ten Hag credit, you've got to give United credit, and the reason that Villa looked poor yesterday was because United set up brilliantly in order to stop them and were able to capitalise and exploit the way they play and turn it finally into goals. What exactly was it that Erik ten Hag did? And in particular, at half-time, 2-0 down, what did Ten Hag do that tweaked the tactics and changed the game for Manchester United? So, in the first half, in terms of the way that Villa set up to play out from the back, we'll come over to the board now and observe their structure. So, the main way that Villa were looking to play out was, in typical fashion, they split the centre-backs. So, you'd have Diego Carlos one side, you'd have Clement Lenglet the other side. And what you'd have sort of in front of that, you've got the double pivot of Dendoncker and Douglas Luiz dropping in. You've got Luca Digne and Ezri Konsa, who did pretty well at right back, I've got to say, in the absence of Matty Cash. They were both pushing on as high as possible to try and extend that gap. Now, this is a crucial bit in United's press because the United wingers often end up doing two jobs, covering both the centre-back and the full-back. What Villa were trying to do was increase this distance as much as possible between the centre-back and the full-back to therefore make that job impossible. Because obviously, if Garnacho, let's say, in this situation is trying to cover both of those at the same time, the bigger that gap is, if he's somewhere along this line, there's an easy gap for Lenglet to drop that ball over the top into Luca Digne. More on that later. Now, Villa's aim by sort of trying to increase that gap was to obviously make it impossible for United to press. The way United reacted, which was the subject of a lot of frustration from the crowd, I could hear on the television broadcast at 2-0 down, was United actually sat a lot deeper and allowed Villa to step up the pitch, pretty much killing their own space. So in that sense, United did well to let Villa basically cause their own problems by compressing their own space that they had to work with. So that is why United weren't just sort of chasing shadows whenever, and in moments were sitting off a little bit. Now, in the first half, what was happening with the United press, as we've seen plenty of times this season, was, Villa would go one side to one of the centre-backs, Højlund would come across to try and shut them into that top half of the pitch, that right half, from Villa's perspective there. And once that happens, it's relatively straightforward there. Bruno Fernandes onto Dendoncker. Eriksen pushes up onto Douglas Luiz, man for man in midfield, like we often see from an Erik ten Hag team. And in terms of what was happening sort of behind that in the Villa forward line, you'd have Ollie Watkins and Leon Bailey staying really high. The idea there is Bailey tries to pin Diogo Dalot so he can't really jump. And John McGinn and Jacob Ramsey with float. So early on, what you tend to see was when Villa went down one side, it meant it was relatively easy. If they went out to the fullback, Rashford was there, he could just sort of get across and obviously Garnacho on the other side. And what would happen then was, obviously, Dendoncker would get a little bit closer, as would Douglas Luiz, as would Garnacho. But the problem for United really arose when Villa then switched the play back to the opposite side. So United are perfectly fine if teams just play out one side and stick that side. We can just shift across, no issues. But the problem that we had first half, which was slightly sort of on the edge of Villa being able to exploit it and turn United inside out several times and just sort of get out of the pitch unchallenged, was that when the ball came back across here, obviously Højlund's had to drop off if that ball's gone into Konsa. Villa can then play back across the other side. And as the ball comes out to the opposite centre-back, Garnacho's role here in the press is to curve his run round, get at Clement Lenglet. But the problem is, in the Premier League, pretty much every team you play has got the ability to either have the centre-back drop off and play that pass over to Luca Digne themselves, hence why Villa were trying to extend that gap to make that target area bigger. the larger area he can drop it into for Luca Digne, the easier that pass is to play. Or alternatively, in the Premier League, you drop it off to your goalkeeper, and your goalkeeper's also got the technique to chip that pass into that area, unlike a former Manchester United goalkeeper who, as we know, is currently unemployed. Now, anyway, enough of that. What was happening for United initially in the first half that was a problem was that, as well as man-for-man in midfield, United were also doing the usual trait of man-for-man against the Villa wingers. So in this case, I'm referring to Leon Bailey and Jacob Ramsey. And what you'd see in this situation was Aaron Wan-Bissaka would be stuck with Jacob Ramsey there, meaning that Luca Digne could just run up the pitch pretty much unchallenged. Now, Ten Hag tweaked this very smartly in the second half. And what he did, instead of keeping Wan-Bissaka there on Jacob Ramsey, he said, right, as soon as that ball goes across, you jump. And Kobe Mainoo, you've got to shift across to deal with Jacob Ramsey. And the rest of the back four have got to shift around like this. In the situation where John McGinn was unchallenged, what they'd do is sometimes, if one of the midfielders could recover quickly enough, they'd deal with John McGinn. Or one of the back three that's left once Wan-Bissaka's gone out would go up there with McGinn, and we play man for man at the back as well. Now, this isn't without risk. Manchester City famously against Arsenal last season, they tore them apart because they had Rob Holding marking Erling Haaland, and that's the error, and that's why Erik ten Hag doesn't do this every single time, is that when you've got the likes of Johnny Evans, no offence to him, he had a great game yesterday, but he's going to struggle in wide channels against the likes of Ollie Watkins and some of the more athletic Premier League players, let's say. That's why Ten Hag wants to keep players in touch with the centre-backs to stop them having to defend those big channels. But if you want to press high, if you want to be aggressive, you can't have it both ways. You can't have loads of players trying to do two jobs at once, so the wingers there covering the fullback and the centre-back, and then you can't also, as well as that, have loads of free men everywhere all over the pitch. So it's a difficult situation where you've either got to go all in and trust that, you know, if it goes wrong, which it will sometimes, your centre-backs are going to be able to deal with it, which obviously with the personnel he's got available, with the likes of Martinez and Maguire out, for example, he knows that he's not got his first-choice centre-backs available, and therefore they could get exposed in the channels. So that's why Ten Hag doesn't do it all the time, but that was the key change, because what it meant was that for Villa, when they picked their heads up in the second half, the Villa players receiving the ball, trying to play out from the back, instead of seeing... Let me get rid of that bit of ink on the pitch there. So instead of seeing players unmarked, what they were seeing in the first half was that when they brought that ball across to Longley, for example, either Digne was able to just escape unmarked, or if Wan-Bissaka came with Luca Digne there, then Jacob Ramsey was often completely free and they were able to just play that ball into him, or Ollie Watkins had sort of dropped off and Ramsey had stayed high. So they had either somebody free between the lines in that situation, or a fullback easily able to be played in down the line to advance up the pitch. And what that meant was that because now every single Villa player was marked, the Villa players had a simple choice to make. Either you trust your guy to take the ball under pressure, which some of these players aren't brilliant at. Ollie Watkins, for all his fantastic attributes, is not the best taking the ball back to goal sometimes, can be a little bit imprecise. What it meant was that Villa, all of a sudden, they look up and every single player is marked. That means every time you're on the ball, you've got to take a risk. Do you play that ball into that player? If it's not precise enough, if you don't play that ball to the right foot, if the weighted pass isn't perfect, there's a great chance for United players to nick that ball back and be really, really aggressive. And this is where United excelled. So Bruno Fernandes in that game, I think he's averaging a ridiculous number of high turnovers this season, more than he ever has done before, and that is due to Erik ten Hag's pressing structure. This man-for-man behaviour in midfield, if you can force teams to play into this area by making sure that every other player is marked, if you are tight enough and your players are aggressive enough, you can win the ball back there in that area and be really, really dangerous. And what I loved from United in this game was firstly the discipline to not engage until Villa were high up enough that, number one, Emi Martinez wasn't involved. So that reduced the state of their numerical advantage there because, well, they had one fewer player involved in the build-up. But number two, they waited and made sure that Villa stepped high enough up the pitch that there was space in behind to then break once they won the ball back. And number three, it was the intensity and the aggression from the players. Once that ball was won back, as soon as that ball was played into Luiz or Dendoncker, Bruno and Eriksson were touch tight all the time, nicking the ball off them. But what I absolutely loved, the key part from United that shows that every single player in this United team is still firmly behind Erik ten Hag, was this aggressive running, this sprinting from Rashford, from Garnacho, from Højlund. As soon as that ball is won back by Bruno or by Eriksson, whoever it is, they're sprinting, doing everything they possibly can. Extra arrow there, I didn't even mean the arrow, but that's how aggressive the sprint was. Another one, there you go. They're getting in behind that defence. ready to try and put the ball in the back of the net. Now, look, it didn't come off for the first half. It didn't come off for the start of the second half. It took time. It took chances. It took things being offside. It took things not falling for the team. But they kept going, kept going, kept going. And with enough belief in themselves, eventually turned it round. So this team is still firmly behind Erik ten Hag. This particular game was a firm green tick for Erik ten Hag in the box in terms of tactically setting up well against one of the most impressive teams in the league this season. He frustrated them, turned the ball over time after time after time, and with better finishing and better decision-making in the final third, that could have been an even more convincing win for Manchester United. So look, give Erik ten Hag criticism for some of the team selection, some of the players he's played in recent weeks. But the reality is this United team are in a really tough moment at this moment in time because the belief has dropped. When the belief drops, players stop trusting each other. You don't always get that intensity of sprint when you win the ball back because they don't trust that the pass is going to be right. You don't always get the conviction to play somebody in the final third. People overthink their decisions. The shots in the wrong moments, it's a soft shot at the keeper or it goes wide or things don't quite happen how you want them to happen. But look, this United team, on this occasion, they kept going, got the win, a brilliant comeback, and if there's a Manchester United performance, this is it. So brilliant game from Erik ten Hag, and for any of you that are Erik ten Hag out, can you explain to me what part of that game is not exactly what a Manchester United fan wants to see? Excitement, attacking football, aggressive in transition, brilliant on the counter, and, of course, a comeback win in front of the Stretford end. What more could you possibly want to see? A brilliant Christmas present from the United team. And we'll see you very soon again on the Tactical View. And until then.